Hello Munchkins, welcome to my channel. So I am doing my very first wrap up. It is the April wrap up. Unlike other people on YouTube, I don't seem to read as fast or as much as they do, but I did read 4 books in total and a whole bunch of fanfic. Obsessed with reading Harry Potter fanfic, especially Dramonie ones, and I'll talk about that later in the videos, but I'm going to start with the books first. The very first book that I read this April is Games, Gods, Play by Abigail Owen. In this world, it is ruled by the Greek gods. In the overworld is basically where the human mortals live as well. So if you think about the modern land now that we're living in, there will be a Greek god ruling over us. The main god that is ruling not only the overworld, but also all the other Greek gods is Zeus, which is quite normal. Normally he's the king of kings. In this world, who rules the gods and the overworld can be challenged. Every 100 years, the gods will hold this deadly contest called the Crucible to determine a new ruler for Olympus, very much like the Hunger Games or maybe the Triwizard tournaments that you might see in Harry Potter, which is why I see a lot of readers comparing this book to those fictions. The gods will fight it out to determine who will be the new king, except they don't have to physically fight each other. No. Instead, each god, which there are 12 of them, will select a human, initially without consent. I will go into that once I start to talk about the labors, which is their challenges of how that is obtained, to play in the Crucible on their behalf to represent them. The god whose champion wins the Crucible is crowned then the king of the gods for the next 100 years, and the champion will get a boon, which in this world is basically a wish like from a genie, and as well as an abundance for their families and homeland. That would be a good motivator for a champion to play the game when you're wondering why they would do it, because it's quite a deadly game. But of course, if you're in a state of affair where you need your fortunes to be turned around, this is a good opportunity to obviously play. So as I mentioned in the past, there are 12 gods who play. Each of them come up with a trial, which in this book are called labors. So 12 gods, 12 mortal contestants, and then there's 12 labors designed by each god, except this time the dilemma is Hades, who normally doesn't play, who we know in Greek mythology is the king of the underworld, has decided to play. Normally, I guess he doesn't play because he's already a king anyway of the underworld, and he doesn't really want to have to deal with anything to do with the other gods. He kind of keeps to himself, and he doesn't really want to rule the living mortals in the overworld either. But in this book, the reputation of Hades, like in maybe Greek mythology, he's deemed one of the worst gods. Hades, like the Greek mythology, is the king of the underworld. So isn't it kind of greedy of him, is what the other people are thinking, of him wanting to be one now the god of both the under and overworld, which means then he's pretty much god of everything, and including the other gods. But it's in the rule book, he is allowed to compete, which he does in this book. And his choice of champion in this book is a 23-year-old raven-haired beauty who is a cursed office clerk for the Order of Thieves living in San Francisco, because it's based in modern time. And her name is Lyra. Or Lara. L-Y. All right, I want to call her Lyra. So now suddenly in this tournament, there are going to be 13 gods, 13 mortals, but there's still 12 labors because Hades only decided to join the Crucible at the very last minute, so didn't have time to actually come up with a labor himself. I suspect he did that on purpose so that they wouldn't find a loophole for him not to be able to compete in this competition. For the champion, there are 2 ways to win. You either win the most labors by the end of the tournament, or be the last mortal standing, which is much then compared to the Hunger Games, where it's basically winner takes all if you are the last man, woman, or person standing at the end of the tournament. Obviously, to keep the reader interested, they have posed mysterious questions for you. Like, for instance, why does Hades suddenly want to play when after so many hundreds of years he has never been involved? Why did he choose Lyra? Because at the start of the book, you just find out that she's a young girl. She is in the Order of Thieves, which means she has been training her whole life to be a thief, but she wasn't actually active as a thief. She works as an office clerk for them, so doing their books, almost like a bookkeeper. So it doesn't make sense why you would choose a champion that really isn't. It doesn't make sense why you would choose a champion that really isn't physically that capable. But I guess we'll see why as we go along in the book. And on top of that, as soon as Hades bumps into Lyra, he calls her his star. And you'll find out, I guess, later as we go along why that is her nickname. Like it or leave it, that is the nickname that in most fantasies where you find the leading man gives the female lead a cute little nickname. This one in Hades has chosen to be his star. This book does end on a cliffhanger to keep you wanting the second book, The Things That Gods Break. The title of the second book actually will make a lot of sense to you if you read the whole entirety of the book. But obviously I'm not going to give spoilers here. This is purely just a recommendation. If you want to find out more, obviously read the book. If you want to hear the whole tale, wait and see, because I am doing a full plot recap. If you want it, subscribe and you'll be kept up to date with when that is released. Ultimately, this is a fun read. A lot of it was great and it was an easy read to get through. The retelling of Greek mythology woven into a tournament with a love story between a god and a mortal is quite fun. In this type of genres, you have like romanticities or romance fantasies where you have the love interest where initially they are a billionaire. Maybe you have Faeries, which I think is like the step up from a billionaire because you're not just human anymore. You are probably rich and you're also magical. And then, you've got those creatures like vampires or werewolves that are also very powerful and magical in some ways. But now I think in this book, the stakes has risen to the utmost elite male leading man that you can get, which is basically a god. I think that's the ultimate love interest, which makes all your human billionaires or simpy guys kind of like drop down a little bit when you've got your leading man being the god of a underworld and potentially a god of all the world and the god of all the gods, which means it's endless, right? What you can get out of these gods. But definitely going to be marrying up or at least connecting with someone that can get you far in life with a god at your side. The author I quite like stays true to a lot of the Greek mythology and stories, like the relationship between their gods, their virtues and tools that they use, and stories of how they interact with each other and are related to each other is very clever and interesting, I think. Was this the perfect book for me? No, I don't think so. The premise of the tournament was very strong, but the execution became a little bit messy, mainly because I think there was just like way too many characters. The author didn't hone in on the characters that you wanted to be focusing on. Much like the Hunger Games, there is like 12 districts. There's 2 people from each district. So technically it should be like similar to this where it's so many characters at the same time. But in that one, they very much focused on the lead and the people that were important to the lead, the antagonists of it, so that it didn't become so much of a messy lead. Whereas I feel like in this book, the author gave attention obviously to the male lead, the female lead, but then all the sub-characters, it felt like she gave equal amount of time to everyone and gave them backstories when sometimes it did not matter what your backstory was, especially if you were not going to be a champion that was going to last very long in the competition anyway, or you were just there purely as a barrier to the FMC. If that's the case, then I don't really care where you came from. I don't care what your backstory is. I just need to know if you are for the FMC or against the FMC, and then we go from there. Because the author is focusing their attention on so many different characters, you get like this lukewarm feeling about each of them, including, I reckon, even the FMC, Lyra. The main focus of her personality was that she was obsessed about her curse and that she was almost a saintly character wanting to save everyone in the competition, which is, I guess, meant to demonstrate to the reader that she's quite a bit of a badass. But internally, she's always got these constant insecure thoughts, which then downgrades her ability to, save someone or even win the competition, because she has so much self-doubt that doesn't even chase or gets a little bit almost whingy to the reader. Also, we were meant to believe that she was someone of pure of heart, but it was a little bit underkill. Unlike much loved characters like Katniss Everdeen, they were good to the people that were good to them and loyal to the people that they knew that were on their sides or they had like a connection with. And then for the people that she knew were not her friends or that were against her, like allied against her, just to sabotage her, Katniss would then distance herself from them, which is fair. Whereas in this book, Lyra, no matter how bad the characters were to her, and openly says that I am not with you, I am against you, she will still go out of her way, put herself in danger, sacrifice her win of the competition in order to save them, which again, really unrealistic. Also, I don't know about you, but I like a character that can be a little bit morally grey. I don't need you to be just sunshine and rainbows and good all the way through, because it makes no logical sense. It makes you a little bit foolish or naive and you just never get out of it. Sure, burn me once that is your fault. But burn me twice, that becomes your fault, Lara, for not learning who your enemies are and who is for you. So because her thoughts are so repetitive, because she's such a goody two-shoes and she's got no layerings throughout the book, it then becomes really hard for me as the reader to like her. And therefore, whether she wins or loses, I'm not very much invested, which is why I don't think it's a perfect read. Hades, on the other hand, I think was a better character, especially as he wasn't a character that waited for the world to dictate what was going to happen to him. Instead, he was clever and scheming enough to find loopholes to dictate the outcomes, which I really like. So a little bit morally more grey, which makes sense because he's the king of the underworld, but also savvy enough and not just waiting and using just utter god magic or strength to win his matches, but instead using his brain and stealthiness to find ways to get around so that he can win and help his champion to win. I do love a character with a plan, not just in this book, but all books, and able to execute. So he is a closer, which I find a lot of the times his scheme does come to fruition and he wins. Although at times he was overly broody, and he is manipulative with everyone, including his champion, which I guess that's why he's the morally grey character. But that is a trope, which a lot of people do like. So as I mentioned before, the writer doesn't highlight which side characters were important. She equally gave them the same amount of time, which meant either she thought of all of them as important, which resulted in the reader concluding who cares about any of them if they win or lose or live or unalive themselves. I saw a review that basically said that all the characters could perish for all I care, except for the dog, which makes total sense to me, and it will make total sense to you if you read the entirety of the book. The trope of the romance was meant to be slow burn, but they seemed to be attracted to each other. Within the first 50 pages, you could at least feel that there was, maybe it was not love, but there definitely was lust because there was already a kissing scene. Granted, the kissing scene was for a sort of advantage in the game. Nevertheless, the kiss then became a makeout session. So, there was no like anticipation or yearning for the reader, which if that's what you like, I don't think it's offered as much or as strongly in this book as it does in other ones. The spice and the smut of this book was okay for me. For a book of this size, which is around a bit over 500, almost 600 pages, there is pretty much just one smutty scene. And I have read like how people on TikTok will rate smutty scenes on how many chilies you'll get. And generally, I think for a book of this size, I would expect a decent amount, about 2 to 3 smut scenes or spicy scenes in there for me to raise like chili ratings for it. So if you're looking for schmut, you'll get a little bit, but maybe it won't fill your quota on this book. The labors, which are the trials, it's definitely action-packed, but there is a lot to keep track of. Since it matters how many labors the champions will win, because if all of them survive or most of them survive, then it's not about who is the last one standing, but about who has won the most. So I found myself, as I was reading it, making notes on the side to remember which of the champions have won which ones and how many. And because there's 12, and the author doesn't tend to target any champions that will win the most. Instead, she tends to spread the love, which makes it then very hard to track, especially when I can't remember which champion is which. They have either similar vibes or similar names, and I had to keep notes for that, which I don't really like doing as a book. I just like to read it and just know, because they will keep referring back to it, so you sort of remember those facts that are important. And I also think that maybe 12 laborers for this size of book is a lot, because the author tends to describe every single labor. Obviously later on you'll see that there's a little bit of a fast track, because maybe they're working out that this is going to be a 1,000-page book if they were to write in detail about every single labor. But a decent amount of the labors do get explained in very deep details about who wins and also what happens in them, which sometimes is not really necessary. Like in Harry Potter with the Tri-Wizard Tournament, there is only 3 challenges to focus on, and then that means that you really hone in on the action in details of each one, and therefore the detail kind of sticks in your mind quite easily. Because there was so much to cover, naturally the ending I think felt a little bit rushed, and there were still questions that were left unanswered, or if there were answers given about why certain things were done, why certain things were chosen, it was very quickly explained, where I would have preferred it to be flushed out. Less on the labors and less on some characters that did not matter to me at all, but explain why you have made these decisions and led you to this path, rather than half a page and then we're done and then that's meant to be answered for you. Overall, my rating for this book is 4 out of 5 stars. I think it was still fun, easy to read. I am going to read the second book when it comes out because I do want to see what happens. But so those minor little minute of too much details, too much characters is probably the thing that made me drop it by 1 star today. Before you read the book, just know there are trigger warnings in there. There is a description. There is quite a bit of description of violence. There's high-risk situation. There's a bit of abuse. There's definitely bullying. There's thieving, because that's what Lara is. She is a thief. There's isolation, colorful language, of course, and smutty scenes. If you are a reader that is sensitive to these elements, and you're a bit tad too young, then maybe consider reading something else or wait until you're old enough to read it. All right, my next book. This one, it was a surprise to me. It was called Whoreiffying with a W by Piper C.J. She talks to the dead, the main character, and they talk dirty back to her, is what the description, if you read up on Goodreads about the plot of this story, that's how they started. Lenny Pendrick runs a haunted museum in Salem, offering seances for a price when she unlocks a cursed chest, and then she frees a ghost called Cora Winters, a silver-tongued ghost with a talent for possession, an insatiable desire for pleasure, and a taste for the living. Then there is the male lead. Oh, I'm going to get this wrong. Deva Rex. I'm going to call him Dev for the rest of the video because I'm going to get it wrong and people are going to get mad at me. So I'm just going to call him Dev because it is short for his name, and they do use that in the book. He is Lenny's most trusted supplier of rare antiques. She likes to collect, old antiques and display it in her museum for people to come and visit in Salem to see. He is a man who always knows exactly what she wants and needs in the sense of antiques, not on anything else. Maybe. She tells herself their chemistry is harmless, but the object he brings her carry whispers of something darker, is what they describe it as. There is a truce between the living and the dead, a seance that goes too far, a scandalous proposition, a secret waiting to be unearthed. She spent her life speaking to the dead, now one refuses to let her go. The plot that they describe as what the book is about before you go further into it. But I will say this was definitely a surprising read, and in a really good way. Based on the cover and on sort of the title and also the description of it, you think it was just going to be like maybe a bit of funny, maybe a bit of goofy ghost smut about ghosts, witches, but it did come with a really good plot twist that I thought it was quite nice. And also it tackles same-sex relationships, and it was quite sweet in parts, even though it's characterized as a little bit of a horror book. Considering that this was a novella, so quite a short read, the author was very quick at producing some very likable lead characters in such few pages, I thought. I've read mammoth books where by the end of it, you still have zero attachment to any of the characters, especially the main ones. But considering that this book was less than 200 pages, I think the author did a really good job to lead us to some likable characters quite quickly. Is there spice in this book? Yeah, there definitely is. But that's not why I enjoyed this book as much as I thought I would. Obviously, the smut is the smut, but there is definitely a plot and there's definitely a twist that some of you might be able to guess, but I was a little bit surprised for it, and I liked how they resolved it as well at the end of the book. There will be characters that I thought that had no stakes in the game. They were just like a side character, a little bit of a filler, but they actually became quite a good friction between the two leads and becoming a little bit more important in the book to create intrigue, I think, for the reader. So there is Lenny, one of the main characters, the witch, the clairvoyant, who can see and speak to ghosts. She's actually the most, I think, normal personality in this story, despite her skills. who has the hots for devs, the antique dealer, who comes around bringing her special finds that fits into a creepy museum that she runs. She's been having hot fantasies about this guy for about the last 18 months, but never actioned it. Having like dirty little fantasies about him, but she hasn't done anything about it because she wants to keep it a professional relationship. One day though, he brings her this antique looking chest, which is meant to be cursed, and she opens it up and out pops Coraline, dressed in nothing but a see-through nightgown, but as a ghost. We're going to call her Cora, because that's what they call her in the book. Initially, Cora doesn't seem to be a very friendly ghost, considering that the first thing she tries to do is to possess Lenny. So she's a ghost that has some skills that are a little bit stronger than normal ghosts, I would say, because she can actually move objects when a lot of ghosts in this book are not able to touch things and move things physically in our human realm. But not only can she do that, but she can, without your permission, depending on, I guess, the strength of your mind, enter into people's bodies and possess it for a period of time or longer. Because Lenny is a witch and she's got that clairvoyant powers, that's why she can block Cora from actually possessing her body without permission. Cora isn't the type of ghost that likes to just observe in the shadows. She's also a little bit horned up for our Lenny, so she's got a little bit of a crush on her. So initially I found Cora's character quite sinister, and there's like some secret that she's holding, and I feel like she has ill intentions towards Lenny and is not to be trusted. So because Cora has this power of being able to possess humans, she also can teach other ghosts on how to sort of enter partially into a human's mind, which means that she can lock a human brain into a room with them. So then that human's mind is there and then the ghost is there, which then makes that when Lenny is doing a seance, say for instance, a customer comes and they've lost a loved one and they want to be reunited with that loved one, Cora is able to teach that ghost that Cora sort of can engage with on how to enter the mind of their past loved ones, get themselves sort of locked or trapped in a room, and then they can feel each other physically in that mind, because it's like in this separate realm of halfway between the living and the unalived, and they can actually speak to each other, touch each other, and have smutty time with each other. So then it becomes like this business of a ghost brothel, which allows humans to contact the ones that they loved, or including unalived celebrities, like for instance Marilyn Monroe. If you ever had that fantasy about seeing Marilyn Monroe and having a one night stand with them, that is the business structure that they have conjured up together. Obviously, having a business like this will attract some questionable clientele, including this misogynistic and entitled man named Brett later on in the book, who wants to have his way, as I stated, with the late Marilyn Monroe. However, Lenny's interaction with Brett created one of the best quotes from the books, which states, "Nothing more terrifying than the entitlement of a straight white man." Yeah, exactly. Once you read the character of Brett, you know exactly what she is referring to. Over time, Lenny and Cora's relationship grows quite strong, and their feelings for each other grows. Once you've got that relationship happening with Lenny and Cora, then Dev suddenly appears in the picture, creating a little bit of a rift. For such a short book, this has a lot going on. People getting possessed, some fun, and some big plot twists, and of course some sexy time in the sheets. My overall rating for this book is 4 stars. It lost a point because I wanted a little bit more backstory for Cora, because I think her secrets were revealed a little bit too quickly, and I feel like that could have been fleshed out a little bit about past, especially considering that she is so, I think she's almost like over 100 years old in this book, and there was a reasoning of how she came to be, how she learnt these new powers that other ghosts don't know, and how she got trapped in a chest of drawers. So I think they went over that quite quickly in this book, and I would have liked a little bit more. So I'd be happy to have an extra few 50 or so pages in this book and make it a little bit longer. Still would have been a novella, but then you would have got a little bit more of a backstory about Cora. And yes, I did find that there was a little bit of editing issues. Maybe there was some spelling mistake and grammatical mistakes and sentences that seemed like they were missing a word here and there, but you will still get the gist of the story. It won't ruin that much of an experience. You'll just notice and be like, what does that sentence mean? And have to reread it because it seems a little bit out of place. Also, in this book, it was written in 2 points of view. So you've got Cora's point of view and Lenny's point of view, but sometimes when I was reading through the chapters, if I wasn't careful, I didn't really know who the point of views were and when it switched over. So I had to go back and check, is this Cora talking or is this Lenny talking? But again, no big deal. It does not ruin the experience, but it just got a little bit confusing at some points. Also, don't forget again to look at the trigger warnings before you start. But if you are all fine with the trigger warnings, then go ahead and read it and let me know if you predicted the twist at the end of this book. All right, my next book was Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wang. Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wang is very popular on TikTok, I've noticed, and also on booktube. It is a dark academia fantasy novel set in the industrial utopia of Tehran, where magic fuels the city advances. So it's like this superficial made city. It is quite elite. It's industrial. It's got electricity. It's got buildings. It's got a lot of great things going on that the outer world outside of this utopia doesn't have. So it's surrounded pretty much by wilderness, whereas this world itself is very industrial and built up, much like how I think how Singapore is, surrounded by like beaches and forests, and then you've got Singapore smack bang in the middle. Every time I was reading about this world, I just thought about how Singapore would look, but with a bit more metal vibe about it. This story follows Siona, an orphan who dedicates over 2 decades to master magic, aiming to become the first woman admitted into the high magistracy. Sakona starts off as that girl, like a bit of a Hermione Granger of magical academia with razor-sharp ambition and zero chill. She claws her way to the top of the system that was not built for her. She wants respect, recognition, and to change the system from within, but she's still working for the system. So it's almost like being trapped in the corporate world, knowing that the corporate world has a lot of issues in there, but you still want to enter it anyway because you think that from the inside you will make lovely changes. Very, very optimistic of this character, I believe. Upon achieving this milestone where she does get into the high magistracy, so being the first woman that becomes admitted into this world of mages where she is now a mage, basically, she has to face a lot of systemic sexism and is assigned Tommel, which is a janitor from the marginalized Kuan people. So there's Turonian people which live in the city, and then there are a bunch of people that come outside of the city that come into the borders because they want, you know, a different world for themselves, and they are considered like the minority group in this, the ethnics, the people of color, and they're called the Kuan people. And she is given a janitor out of disrespect rather than an actual lab assistant who has been studying as a lab assistant. So that's one way that this systematic world of corporations disrespect her, by giving her someone that isn't qualified to actually be helping her. The book starts actually with Tommel's point of view. He's with his tribe of the Kuan, who is living outside of Tehran. They are standing at the edge of a frozen lake. On the other side is the utopian, that they could save their tribes from the blight that is affecting their race. So outside of this world, there is a disease, a blight that is basically unaliving all the people outside of it, and including his tribe, who have diminished to a very small pool of people. And they want to save their people, obviously, but in order to do that, they have to cross this frozen lake. And while they're crossing the frozen lake, there is high risk of this blight wiping out all the people as they run across it, or the frozen lake is actually quite thin. There is also the risk of, as you run across this frozen lake, of falling into it and freezing. Now, the blight appears in this book initially as a light that attacks the body. It unravels their body and then unalives them in the most sort of gruesome way that you can think possible, and it's not a pretty sight, nor is it pleasant for the person. The blight actually took Tommel's father from when he was a young child, and Tommel unfortunately was there to witness that blight attacking it, so he knows firsthand exactly what the blight will do. The only family member now he has with him is his older sister, who is standing on the lake's edge with him, and she's standing there with also her husband and their newborn child. So Tommel's niece is there as well. They're all trying to run into the utopian place. The first chapter, I will say, sets the tone of this book. It's not going to be a cozy read or light, as the author isn't afraid in getting rid of characters very quickly, especially if you're attached to them. Obviously, Tommel makes it to the Tehran, to the utopian place, hence why his life is now intertwined with our female protagonist, Tomo is your classical quiet guy, the introvert, who knows way too much and knows exactly what's going on, but obviously has to keep quiet because he's the minority, he's the ethnic guy, always treated with disrespect and a little bit less than a normal tyrant. He just does his business, keeps quiet in order to not make trouble and get himself not noticed by the authorities, because it just means more trouble for himself. Obviously, I think this character deserves more pages, but obviously there was no time for that because there is a lot going on. But after everything that he's gone through, all the struggles that has to deal with, that this man definitely deserves a nap at the end of it. He's someone that plays the long game. He knows the system is evil in Tyrant, especially for his kind, but survival has meant keeping his head down. He doesn't trust Siona at first, and for good reason, because she is sort of not her equal. She is his master and he's almost her slave. She treats him though with a casual superiority. She's polite, but you can tell from the read that she thinks herself better than him. She's not malice about it. She's trying her best, but I guess because she's been brought up with somewhat of a privilege, she is clueless about her eliteness. And she has been marinating in this system for a very long time. Throughout the book, you'll see and be demonstrated that Tomo is very socially aware. He knows, without being in Siona's shoe, that she is highly ambitious, but he knows that she's been set up to fail in this world, and she's basically going always against the brick wall. So he just plays dumb, keeps quiet, and he just observes her. Their early interactions in the book, I would say, is filled a little bit with passive aggressiveness, maybe from Siona, or maybe from Tomo to her, and maybe little vile jabs, misunderstandings and miscommunications, a lot of quiet rage for Tomo's character, and even for Siona's character when she has to deal with the other male colleagues in this world. Together though, as they're working along on their mission in this book where they're trying to expand the barrier. So what happens is, in this world there is this superficial barrier around it, and because of all the people that are coming from outside of the barrier coming in to live, to run away from the Blythe, the world is getting quite populated, and they want to expand the barrier and make it a bigger world for themselves. But in order to do that, they have to find energy sources outside of the world to fuel this whole utopian city, because it's run on all this magic that they can cipher from outside of the world. Siona and many of the other mages now, their pure focus is to find new energy sources outside of this world and try to gather them into this new world to help expand everything out. While they're working on this, a dark secret about the city's magical foundation is found out by both Siona and Tomo together, and I guess it challenges your viewpoint of this perfect world. Once that secret is revealed, Siona is shocked. Tomo is like, yeah, congratulations. I knew all along that there was something a little bit fishy about this world, and it's a bit corrupt, but you're so self-absorbed you probably just didn't notice it. Siona's reaction though to the secret, because it is quite a devastating secret if you're going to read the book, and she does have a meltdown and go into, all the stages that you'll go through with grief. She is in denial on it, followed by, you know what, maybe I can fix it and make it better and build a system from the inside that, isn't as dark and it's a bit more ethical. Whereas Tomo's viewpoint is, the system is a meat grinder. You don't fix a meat grinder, you unplug it and burn it. And here's the wild thing, even though they have two different sort of points of view about how to fix this discovery, they do eventually come together and work together. Despite everything, they both want change. They just have very radical different ideas of what that means. So I think this is a very intelligent book, and there's a lot of themes and reception of this book that readers will get out of it that applies very much in our modern world, especially for those who are in the system and you are maybe like I am, a person of color and a female that has experienced discrimination, especially when you work in a corporate world as I do. Everything in this book resonated with me quite a lot, and I found it so interesting and maybe at times a little bit frustrating and angering, not about the book but about the world that we live in. It's just trying to highlight the discrimination that we have in our current world, but in this made up magical world, which applies very muchly to ourselves. This book definitely does not mess around. It may seem like a magical academia romp at first glance. It goes deep into the emotional dungeon for you. Here are some of the trigger warnings that I would say that this book has. There is definitely violence and gore, including graphic description of bodily harm and magical experimentation. Definitely not for the faint-hearted. It can be a little bit squirmish. There is, I would say, torture and body horror. Some scenes being very descriptive of what happens in the procedure. So if you don't like that, maybe this is not the book for you. There is themes of genocide and ethical cleansing. The plot involves a really terrible secret about the city's magical foundation, as I mentioned earlier, and rooted in it is systemic exploration and erosion of possible certain ethnic groups, let's just say. The people, obviously, as I said, outside of the boundaries, Kurds are very much discriminated against, seen as much a lower class compared to the glossy academics and the people of the Trajan world. There is 100% institutional racism, colonization. The Kuen people, including obviously Tamil, are victims of deeply entrenched systemic oppression, making sure that they always stay low and never being able to climb out of their slums, basically. There is sexism and misogyny. You'll see a lot of it for Siona when she starts working at the ministry, and how she is treated and the way they speak to her and how they exclude her and bully her. She has to crawl her way through the patriarchy areas, and the fact that they appointed her a janitor and don't include her in after work drinks is all highlighted in this book. Her work is generally dismissed or downplayed, and her emotions are criticized and almost gaslit to basically make her feel like she's going a little bit crazy or overreacting, or she's being too ambitious and aggressive about her pursuit. There is self-harm and maybe thoughts of unaliving that will be mentioned in this book. So, be kind to yourself of what you choose to read. I would say the High Magistry is the magical equivalent of a toxic corporate pyramid scheme. Every time Sionia questions the ethics of what is going on, she's met with certain phrases that maybe you're very attuned to. Is you're overreacting, this is how it's always been, you're being too emotional, and you need to be more logical and objective, which is a lot of the sentiments of the males in this book that are higher up, that this is why we don't allow females to be in the ministry, because they're not logical, and all we need is logic to make decisions. And as we know in the real world, if the past there was more women making decisions, maybe a lot of the things that happened at wartime would not have happened, because yes, we use emotions to make decisions, and we don't just think about winning and logic and sacrifice the many in order to gain, more land, more money, more wealth, more greed. Maybe you do need to add some emotions in your decision making, as we've learned nowadays. This is classical gaslighting in this book, with obviously a magical twist entwined with it. But they even tried to recruit her into the system and tried to almost brainwash her into thinking like them and just joining their corporate world, which also happens. You see a lot of women in our lives that is indoctrinated into the corporate world. In order to get to the top, women start acting like men in order to fit into the boys club, and you then become part of the system, and it's hard to then get out of it. At the end of the day, the relationship between Siona and Tamil, it's not a redemption story. It is not a real romance story, although there is a little bit of romance. But I would say if you're looking for that, this is not the book that's going to give you that feel. At times, you don't even know if they're even friends, because they're all on so opposite sides to them. Can a master and a slave really eventually be friends? Can a master and slave really actually have a longevity relationship? Is some of the questions. So I don't think it's that, if that's what you're looking for this book. There is definitely a power indifference between the two. There's complicity versus resistance, and what it costs to be good in an evil system is mainly the points that will be coming up. Despite the fact that I say it's not a romantic book, it is quite intimate, especially between the two characters, because in the long run, when they're dealing with this new realization of the evilness of the system, they learn ugly truths about each other. And when you know those sort of intimate details about each other, of course, there is going to be intimacy and a close bond about it. And then at the end, there is a quote that says, maybe it would be 100 generations before the sun rose on a life of dignity for their descendants, but the worthwhile run was not the sprint. Meaning that maybe this book will not resolve all of the issues, because they're huge. How can a book of this size just figure out all the answers? But they maybe make a little bit of progress. My final rating for this book is 4.5 stars. It's almost a perfect read for me. It only lost half a star because of the ending for myself. If you are not someone that requires a happy ending all the way through, then I think you'll be fine for you. Before I was getting to the end, I was curious of what it was going to be like, because I don't like to be saddened by a book. So I was looking at how does this book end, and without spoilers, it says this book ends, it's a tragic ending, but it's satisfying. Right? So you will be satisfied, and I believe that to be true. There is tragedy because the world is not perfect, but you are satisfied because a lot of the things are resolved, and in a very, very satisfying way that it should be resolved that way from my point of view. I am definitely in awe of the author for being able to address so many relatable topics in our current world, especially for women and especially for people of color. I think this is a book that, after you read it, if you're very in-depth with the topic, it is definitely a book you're going to be thinking about in the long run, and maybe even like, this is definitely a worthy book club read for you to discuss all the different little nuances and deep-rooted issues that it addresses. That is very relatable. So my last book for the month, after reading, I think, a heavy book with the sad and ending and the tragedy of it, I wanted to read something a little bit more lighter and cozier. And so I read what was obviously another popular book on TikTok, which is Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett, I think is her name. It is described as a cozy fantasy, and it is set in the 1909. Although I would say certain scenes are very cozy, sweet, romantic, cute, there was a lot of scenes that were quite dark. In the vibes, I would say, of a Grimm's Brothers fairy tale. So that sort of edgier fairy tale storytelling is ingrained in this book. However, as we see the book in the point of view of Emily, our FMC, who I think people have described her as a little bit autistic, she sees the event as a very matter-of-fact way, as you would think that Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory would evaluate a situation as factual, and this is what is happening and this is how I solve it. Because it's written in that sort of tone when she's writing, because it's written in her journal entries as she describes the things that are happening to her without too much emotion or fear, or even she's neither too fearful, she's neither too happy, she's sort of just sitting in the middle. I think that makes it quite nice in that it doesn't become too dark in that sense. So you imagine if like the Muppet Show meets the X-Files and they decide to co-author a field guide on fairies. That's the sort of delightfulness that Heather Fawcett serves up in this book. A cozy fantasy that equals like an academic misadventure, fae folklore, and a slow burn charm to it. This is the first book in a book of 3, with the second installment, Emily Wilde's Maps to the Outer Lands, already available, and I believe the third book also is now just come out this year. So you can now just happily get on with it and read all 3 books in a row if you want to, if that's who you are. You don't like to break it up, go for it. So let's describe Emily. She is a Cambridge professor and a leading dryodologist, which is someone that studies fairies. I'm not going to say that word again for the rest of the video because I cannot. She is brilliant with ancient texts and enchanted creatures, but also as socially inept. So at the same time, she is brilliant, very much like Sheldon Cooper was brilliant in his academics. He was socially inept with his group and peers. Emily is the same sort of character. She's fantastic. She knows a lot. She has heaps of knowledge and remembers a lot of ways to deal with fae folks, but she cannot deal with human beings in the same nature, and sometimes puts her foot in her mouth a lot of the times and gets them offside to a point where they feel like she hates them and they become standoffish to her. You will see if you start reading through the book. So the book follows her journey to the frosty village of Havnisvisk. Again, can't say it because it's like a Swedish land, I believe, and there is a lot of hidden ones, a mysterious species of fairies that live there, which is why she's going to this cold village. She's accompanied by only one other breathing specimen, which is her loyal dog named Shadow, who's also a character in itself in this book. He's very lovable, he's very protective, and you'll grow to, I think, quite love this character, Shadow. She hopes to gather first-hand accounts and observations to finalize her Encyclopaedia of Fairies. However, as I said, because she's a little bit awkward, she's introverted in nature, and she only has a focus on her research, it makes it challenging for her to connect with all the villagers in this land. And once she gets them offside, it becomes really hard for her to gather any knowledge from them, and they sort of avoid her or don't share everything that they know about all the hidden creatures in the land. But she is courageous, ambitious, and she has a one-track mind for what she wants to do. And she starts exploring the freezing lands herself. And she even is able to make a friend with a common fairy, who she names him Poe, which is quite cute. He's a really adorable side character in this book. It sort of demonstrates to the characters the knowledge that she has on how to negotiate with them to get what she wants from them, and maybe even to escape their fate trickeries. Although she is very equipped to deal with all the fairies, like I said, not equipped to deal with humans as much, and therefore when her charismatic academic rival, Wendell Bumblebee, I'm just going to call him Bendel, he crashes her research party and shows up at her door at the village. Despite her initial annoyance of him just showing up and sort of taking over her space, coming into her cottage and bringing 2 research assistants with him to sort of basically be his servants to clean up the place and gather firewood for him, she finds that his charisma is very helpful to bridge the gap between herself and the village. And from his either assisting with building rapport with them and also some tips for her on how to build rapport with them, they become much more warmer to both of them at the same time, and then start to reveal a lot more secrets and a lot more things that have been happening in the village, which helps her a lot in her research. I would say Wendell's character to me reminds me a lot of Daniel Cleaver, the character that Hugh Grant plays in Bridget Jones's Diary. So if you're thinking about a very English, charming F-boy, which he is because he does, have his time with some of the village ladies there, in considering such a short time, he comes across as quite lazy, a little bit arrogant, so assured of himself just because he was born into a life of privilege. But he's got that likable and charismatic character about him that you really can't dislike him that much, and you can see why he gets his way a lot of the times. But I think the pairing is obviously required. You've got Wendell, who is charismatic, even fashionable compared to Emily's drabby's ways and seriousness. Together, they make a very delightful duo. So they're like yin and yang. And I think the banter and the begrudging sort of characteristics and interactions they have between each other is what makes this book so cozy and sets it really nicely in that Victorian era of grumpy versus sunshine trope that people really like. As they delve deeper into this fairy world, their relationship evolves from academic annoyance to something warmer, like a cup of cocoa sprinkled with a little bit of enchantment, I would say. As they delve deeper in the mysteries of the hidden ones, Emily and Wendell uncover dark secrets about the fairies and other interactions that they've been having with the village people. You would see that the investigations lead them down a path where they actually have to confront a powerful king trapped in an enchanted white tree. The release of this entity sets off a series of events that threaten both Emily and the village. But with the help of Wendell and the villagers, Emily must navigate this treacherous fairy realm, confront ancient magic, and make difficult choices to protect the ones that she starts to slowly care about. This novel will explore themes of folklore, knowledge, and the complexity of human connection, I think. If you love learning about mythology, folklore, or dark fantasy type, then I think this is definitely a book for you. Like I said, the book is written from the point of view of Emily in journals. So therefore it provides a lot of intimate look into her thoughts and experience of how she perceives the world. The format combined with, there is actual footnotes in her journals and academic observation, I think adds quite a bit of depth into the world building and immerses the reader into like this make-believe enchanted world. I would say this is a cozy fantasy, but with a little bit of a bite. Think about snow-laden landscapes and candlelit cottages. It doesn't really shy away from the darker fairy laws. The hidden ones are quite eerie and dark in their behavior. Sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're cruel, and you'll see that sort of unfolding in the narrative of especially what they do to the humans and what they're willing to do with the humans without any sort of remorse or moral ethic compass. I think this is a book that is perfect for readers who appreciate a slow burning plot, richly woven folklores, and characters who are as flawed as they are fascinating. If you're in the mood for a tale that feels like sitting by a cozy fire, sipping on mulled wine, then I think this is a good next read for you. My ratings for this book, for me, is a 5 out of 5. I love the world building. I love the two main characters, and I also even love the side characters. They did not overdo it with all the stories of different characters. Some of the characters were introduced at appropriate times in order to move the characters along, but the ones where you want to have like the found family for Emily and Wendell, they were definitely a bit more highlighted in the book, so it did not confuse the reader of who was important and who was not important. All right, so lastly, what I read was, as I said at the start of the video, a lot of fanfics. Some of them were just one-shots, which means if you are into fanfic, one-shots is like one chapter only, and then boom, it's done. You might read like 6,000 words and then you're done, because sometimes after a long, hefty book, I just want to be satisfied and just get a story over and done with. And because I'm escaping into the world of Harry Potter, and I read in March pretty much all fanfic of Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy being together, my brain is now ingrained in me that those two are always going to be together. So when I read one shots, it makes totally sense why they would be in love or why they would just have a smut scene. If you have not ingrained yourself into this two people being a love interest, or even Draco Malfoy being a love interest for anyone, because you're just thinking about the Draco that you see in the movies as opposed to the AI versions of Draco, then I think don't go into one shots yet. Read, a substantial fanfic if you want to. But I was pleasantly surprised of how well fanfics are written, to the point that I'm going to make a video later about my top 5 Harry Potter world and between Hermione and Draco. So, but for what I read, I'm just going to quickly go through them, and then you can ask me more questions about it in the comments, and if you want more information, of course I will give it to you. All right, one shot I read Husband Size. This is a 1-chapter book. It is not smutty, it is just cute and funny. Draco is very simpy for Hermione. Hermione have a little bit of a tiff. He runs over to one of his besties, which is Pansies, and it's written from her point of view, and it's her basically dealing with this sad Draco and sort of talking him off the cliff so that he will realize that he's either better off without Hermione, or he can just suck it up and go make nice with her. Very cute, very funny. I Hate You, I Love You. Super, super short. Think about the scene in Mr. and Mrs. Smith when Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie finds out that they're both assassins, because that's what Hermione and Draco are. They're assassins, and they're fighting it out, and suddenly they're doing it. That's pretty much the book. It's smutty, it's hot, it's very quick, it just gets straight into the smut. So if you're, again, not seeing these two together, I wouldn't recommend it. Or if you're not into like schmut, also this is not for you. All right, the next one I read was a short story, Baby Anytime You're Ready, I'm Waiting. It is cozy as all the people in Harry Potter are now all besties and friends, and they hang out together. So you've got Harry, you've got Ron, you've got Ginny, you've got Hermione, which is the Gryffindor, and then you've got the Slytherin side, which is Draco, you've got Pansy, you've got Theo, you've got Blaise, and they're all good friends, and they go on a weekend getaway or a week getaway together in this really, spiffy little cottage, and there's a slow burn between Hermione and Draco where he's loved her for so long, and finally he cannot stand it any longer and he bursts at the seam and confesses his love for her, and there is, of course, schmut, and then a happy ending, which is lovely and sweet. But a few more chapters, maybe I think 8 in total, so if not as quick of a read, but definitely quicker than a novel. Another one shot I read, Seeker Fit. This is set in high school time where Draco is a seeker, Hermione is a head girl. They're both actually head boy and girl, and then they're friends. They've gone through the war together, and it's just about how they get to their first kiss. So very quick, very cute, but nothing too schmutty, just a first kiss. The next one shot I read was The Seduction. As you can read from the title, there is a seduction. So again, there's a lot of stories that are very similar to each other, where Draco's been pining over Hermione for a very long time, and they get to this point where he gets frustrated and he tells her the truth. They have been best friends. They're in a book club together where there's just two of them. Hermione has no idea that Draco is in love with her. How could you not know when someone creates a book club with just you and him together? Clearly there is something, more maybe sinister happening, where he's possibly got the hots for you, but he's been in love with her. It's been going on for 2 years. This man is a patient man. 2 years of hanging out together, going to dinner, talking about books, and still nothing. And then he obviously can't stand it anymore and be like, do you just not like me? Should we just end this? And she's all confused and stuff. He finally confesses, and then he's like, I've been trying to seduce you. And she's like, really? I did not know. And then, she's like, well, if you're going to seduce me properly. So this is the one shot where Draco brings all his efforts out and tries to give her a seductive night, and it leads into some schmutty time. All right, the last fanfic I read that is also a one shot is Helicopter and Baby Bumps. This is where one of the quotes is, the Malfoy men serve their women. Malfoy and Hermione are already together. They're in love, super, super in love, and Hermione is pregnant. And there is literally no plot. It is you following a day in the world of Malfoys. You see how much they're in love with each other, all the things that he does for her, and also Hermione sort of responding back to the love. And he's very protective of her because she's heavily pregnant. You see how he, takes care of her in the middle of the night by getting her a snack, when she peppers him with kisses on the forehead to wake him up instead of just shoving him. So it's a very loving relationship. It's cozy as there's no smut in it, but after reading it, I felt like you could literally feel the love emulating off the words into you, and it gave you this really warm, fuzzy feeling of, gee, if you were going to be in love, this is the sort of love I would want for myself. And it's just lovely, and it's so quick and easy to read. But if you're feeling like cheering yourself up, or you want to feel like that little euphoric kick, this is definitely a really good fanfic to read. All right, guys, that is pretty much all the books that I finished reading in April, also all the fanfics. If you are interested in knowing any more about my fanfics, or even wanting a full recap of some of the books, let me know and I'll work on it. I am doing, remember, as I said, games that gods play, and I'm going to give you also a list of my top 5 fanfic that you can read if you're starting out from, if you want to go more in depth into it. If you have enjoyed yourself and you have stayed this long, thank you so much for staying with me. Please support my channel because it's brand new. Like, subscribe, make some comments, give me some suggestions of books to read, give me some suggestions of definitely fanfics to read because I would love them. And until then, happy reading. I will see you on the next one. Bye.